Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Courtney and this is Short Time True Crime. In this channel, I pretty much just discuss true crime cases in a much shorter amount of time. I don't go into like a lot of detail that makes the case drag on. I'm just short, sweet, and to the point. So if that is something that sounds interesting to you, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss an upload. We're going pretty far back in this case. I feel like the last few cases I've covered have been like kind of in the past a lot. We're going back to the early 1900s and we are talking about Dolly Oesterreich. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that last name right. It's odd spelling and I've heard so many different ways to pronounce it, so I'm just going with Ostrich. Dolly Oesterreich, she was a housewife in her early 30s and she was married to the owner of a Milwaukee apron factory. Her husband's name was Fred Ostrich and he was a very successful businessman, business owner, and he worked extremely long hours. Now, Dolly didn't like that. Dolly has needs and Fred was not meeting her needs because, for one, he was working such long hours. Two, whenever he came home, he would much rather grab a bottle of beer than his wife. And three, allegedly, he wasn't very good in bed. So yeah, Fred was not meeting Dolly's needs. She was getting very frustrated about it. And one day in 1913, Dolly was sitting down at her sewing machine. She was going to sew some things and she noticed that her sewing machine was broken. So she gets a hold of Fred and she's like, hey, my sewing machine's not working. I need help. Send somebody to fix it. So he sends a young man, 17-year-old Otto Schneber. All of these last names just, I can't read. So Otto was a 17-year-old young boy, really. I mean, he's only 17. And Fred sends him over to his home to repair Dolly's sewing machine. Now, Dolly knew Otto from working in Fred's factory. And I don't know if she just had a hunch that Fred was going to be sending this man over or what. But when Otto arrived, he knocks on the door, Dolly answers it, and she is wearing nothing but a bathrobe. Now, Otto must have really liked what he saw because an affair started like that, right then and there. All it took was answering the door in a bathrobe. Now, at first, Dolly and Otto would have this sexual affair going on in secret, and they would go to like hotels, and they would meet outside of Dolly and Fred's home. But after a while, Dolly didn't like how, you know, she was using all of Fred's money for these hotel rooms. Fred was going to notice. It was such an inconvenience for them to have to leave and go get a hotel somewhere. So they decided to stop getting the hotel rooms and they would just hook up in Dolly and Fred's bed. Her husband's bed. She is bringing this young boy. I can't help but call him a boy because he's a minor. I don't know how all of that worked back then, but to me, I mean, he's a baby. Anyway, she's bringing this young guy in and hooking up with him in her husband's bed while he's at work. Now, nosy neighbors, you know how that is everywhere. I feel like it's everywhere. So nosy neighbors were starting to ask, like, who's this guy that keeps coming around your house when your husband's at work? And she told everybody that Otto was her half-brother. So after a while of this, they're like, okay, we're drawing way too much attention to ourselves. And since they were hooking up so frequently, Dolly says, how about you just move into my attic? And this way he would never be seen coming or going from the house. He was always going to be living up in the attic. And this went on for almost a decade. Otto quit his job at the factory and he had pretty much no family, no friends, and he was spending all of his time there with Dolly, and I mean, nobody knew he was gone. Now, the attic wasn't that big, so he was confined to this little tiny space, and he couldn't leave the house because people would see and they would draw more attention to themselves. So he stayed up in this attic and he worked on writing pulp fiction stories, and he was wanting to get them published to make some money, which he did actually end up getting a few of them published. The Los Angeles Times actually said, quote, at night, he read mysteries by candlelight and wrote stories of adventure and lust. By day, he made love to Dolly Oesterreich, helped her keep the house, and made bathtub gin. So at this point, it's been going on for about 5 years. Dolly and Otto are still carrying out this affair, and Otto is still living in the attic. So around 1918, Fred told Dolly that he wanted to sell the house and move to Los Angeles. Now, of course, Dolly is freaking out because now she has to figure out a way to move Otto with them without Fred knowing, and they have to have a house with an attic. So Dolly was very, very, very persistent that whatever house they buy, like, yeah, it's fine, let's move to LA, but we have to have an attic. So Dolly found a home overlooking Sunset Boulevard, and daggone it, it has an attic. And before they officially moved in, Dolly sent Otto there to move himself into his new attic. So life is going on, the same thing every day. It's been nearly a decade now. It is August 22nd, 1922. And one night Fred gets home from work. Him and Dolly start to argue. Otto is up in the attic. And the fight is getting pretty heated, pretty intense. So Otto, he just decides that he's had enough of this and he's going to burst downstairs and save Dolly from Fred. When Otto came downstairs, he was holding 2 pistols. And Fred recognized Otto from the factory nearly a decade ago, and it pretty much clicked really fast for him that, oh my god, this is going on, you're with my wife. So, of course, Fred gets very angry. The 2 men struggled, and the guns went off. Now, there were 3 shots. 2 went into the ceiling, and 1 went into Fred's abdomen, which ultimately ended up taking his life. Now, Otto's panicking, Dolly's panicking, so she knew that the neighbors were going to hear gunshots and screaming, and so the police would be called. So Otto and Dolly spring into action and come up with a very quick plan. Otto locks Dolly in a closet, which locks from the outside, and then Otto takes the guns and he runs upstairs to his attic and he hides out there. So sure enough, police were called, police arrive on the scene. Dolly is locked in a closet, which is locked from the outside, so she definitely did not do that, right? And Otto was nowhere to be seen because he was up in the attic and police didn't go searching in the attic. So Dolly was very, very adamant that it was a burglary, and they locked her in the closet and they shot and killed Fred, and they took some expensive belongings like a watch, and the gun was not there. Police were kind of like, not really believing her, but there was no evidence to prove that she had anything to do with this, so they released her. So now poor Dolly Oesterreich is a widow, and she decides to move into a new home and just continue on with her life. So you would think at this point, you know, she's a widow, she doesn't have her husband around any longer. You would think that if she's going to continue this thing with Otto, that he would just live normally around the house and maybe they would get married and just have a normal relationship. But no. She moves Otto into the attic of this 3rd home and begins a relationship with another man named Herman Shapiro. Mr. Shapiro was a very successful lawyer, which means he works very long hours as well. And Dolly's not liking this. So she still has Otto in the attic, and she brings in another lover. His name is Roy Klum. So she's married to Herman Shapiro now, the successful lawyer who's constantly gone because he's always working. She has Otto in the attic, and then she's sneaking in another man. And somehow, Dolly persuades this new man, Roy Klum, to get rid of the gun, one of the guns that was used to kill Fred. She said it looked a lot like the burglar's gun, and she didn't want to get in trouble when she's batting her eyes and Lord knows what else. And somehow, he agrees to get rid of a gun for her. No question. He tossed it in a tar pit. So then she sweet talks the neighbor, and I don't know what else she did to him. You know what? Nothing with this woman would surprise me, but she sweet talks the neighbor into burying the other gun in his backyard. How this woman is attracting all of these men to sneak around with her, and then 2 of them get rid of guns for her. Like, what? So eventually Dolly ends up breaking up with Mr. Klum, which pisses him off. So he goes to the police and he's like, hey, this batshit lady had me throw a gun in the tar pit. Let's go get it out. I think she killed somebody with it. So they go, and the police have the gun removed from the tar pits. And Dolly was taken into custody. When this got out, her neighbor called the police and was like, hey, me too. There's a gun buried in my backyard that she persuaded me to get rid of for her. Here you go, you can have it. But because the guns have been corroded over time, they couldn't even tell, get like a serial number or anything to tell if the guns were connected to the guns that killed Fred. So Dolly's in jail, and she gets a hold of her current husband, Mr. Shapiro, the lawyer, and she says, please buy groceries for Otto. He's living up in the attic. It's my half-brother. I have no way of getting a hold of him. He's going to starve. He's not going to know he can come down. Please get some groceries. Knock on the attic door 3 times and he'll know to come down to eat. But so Mr. Shapiro, Dolly's husband, he goes home, gets, has the groceries, knocks on the attic door. Otto comes out and he's like, man, I am so lonely. I'm so bored. Man, do I have a story for you? He spills everything. He talks about the affair that started in 1913 and is still going on, and he's living in the attic. He's not her half-brother. He's her lover, and Mr. Shapiro is pissed. So Mr. Shapiro kicks Otto out of the house, tells him to get lost, and he gets Dolly released on bail. He was pretty upset, but apparently the fact that his wife was keeping a lover up in her attic for over a decade wasn't a deal breaker. So they're all good. They're still married. They're fine. All of the charges against Dolly Oesterreich were dropped. But 7 years later, the marriage was just irreparable. There was no going back to the way things were before. Mr. Shapiro, he couldn't really accept the fact that all of that happened with Dolly. So he moves out and he calls the police and he said, hey, let me tell you about everything I've gathered about Fred Ostrich. So again, warrants are out for Dolly. She's arrested, and warrants are out for Otto too. Otto's defense team tried to say that Dolly enslaved him, and that because he was enslaved, he had the mind of like a 10-year-old or something like that. And so he didn't really know what he was doing. But Otto was found guilty of manslaughter even after his defense team tried all of that. And this case became known as the Batman case because Otto had been kept in a secluded, like, cave-like attic for so many years. But the statute of limitations on the manslaughter offense ran out, and Otto was a free man. There was nothing they could do. Dolly Oesterreich went to trial for a conspiracy charge, but after a hung jury, she walked free too. All charges against both Dolly and Otto were dropped in 1936, and Dolly passed away in 1961 at the age of 80. Hopefully she got some insight on relationships, but I mean, who knows? And that is the case of Dolly Oesterreich, the Batman case. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like try to sound disrespectful about the case and like laugh, but like it blew my mind. Especially after, her first husband was gone, and then instead of just shacking up with Otto, she puts him back up in the attic and brings another man and 2 other men. So it's like, wow, I don't know. I want to know your thoughts about the case. Y'all stay safe out there, and I will see y'all next week. Bye!